Poland, October 1943. The morning smelled like wet wool and coal smoke. Frost clung to the barracks windows in thin white veins. Captain Friedrich Hartmann buttoned his tunic by habit, each click of metal as neat as a prayer he no longer believed in. Orders waited on his desk, stamped twice, typed clean. Subject: transfer of displaced miners to relocation facility. Escort detail. Rail schedule attached. Sign here. He read the lines again, slower. Miners. The word should have been soft. On paper, it felt like ice. Outside, trucks coughed awake, one after another, as if the morning were a long throat clearing. A clerk brought coffee that tasted like burned bread and fear. Hartmann said thank you, even now, because manners cost nothing when everything else did. The orphanage sat at the edge of town, a brick box with a tired roof and a tired nun at the gate. She greeted him with a nod that looked like surrender. In the yard, children lined up in pairs, coats too big, shoes too small, quiet like church. A girl stood near the front, holding a doll with no head. She tried to salute him, almost smiling, as if soldiers were still what stories said they were. Hartmann's palm rose by reflex, then stopped halfway. He lowered it to his side like it weighed a ton. The adjutant whispered numbers: 43 names, 2 infants, 3 siblings who would be separated by car and number. The list made no room for proximity or promises or birthdays. Names became columns that fit neatly on a page. He walked the line, boots tapping out a pace he could not slow. One boy wore a scarf the color of autumn leaves and kept glancing past the gate, the way a dog waits for a door to open that never does. A nurse pinned tags to coats. The tags had more certainty than the faces. Hartmann signed the manifest. Ink dried quickly in the cold. The pen shook once. He told himself it was the weather. Rail officials argued about timetables and coal allotments. A junior officer made a joke about quotas that none of the guards laughed at. A locomotive hissed and shifted like a creature deciding whether to move. In its steam, Hartmann imagined Vienna, his mother's kitchen, warm bread, his father reading the paper aloud. Memory came with a smell and left with a bruise. He reread the orders. Relocation. The word did what it was built to do. It erased the part that hurt. A nun approached, small and steady. She said, "Captain, some of these children are sick." He nodded, said he would note it. She didn't leave. She added, "Some are only 5. You could say no." The sentence hung between them like fog that refused to lift. He answered with the line that had kept him alive this long. "Not my decision, sister." She closed her eyes as if praying for both of them and stepped back into the winter air. They began to load the truck. The girl with the headless doll climbed the step, tripped and laughed at herself because that is what children do after falling, pretend it was a game. A guard steadied her. He had a scar across his knuckles and a softness in his eyes he tried to hide. Hartmann noticed the softness and looked away, as if it were a breach of discipline. He counted them twice, then counted the silence where counting didn't help. From somewhere beyond the station, church bells rang noon, thin, reluctant notes. Trains didn't stop for bells. The timetable cared only about minutes and coal. He signed the final page. The clerk salted it with sand to dry the ink faster. "Everything in order, Captain." Hartmann nodded. "Everything in order." He turned toward the children again. The girl with the doll lifted the empty cloth where a face should have been and whispered so only he could hear, "Is the place nice?" His mouth opened, but the answer didn't arrive. A breeze shifted, carrying the iron smell of the tracks and something older, like damp leaves and long winters. He said the only truth he could carry without breaking: "You will ride together." It was not enough. He knew it as soon as he said it. Truth, when small, sounds like a lie that ran out of breath. The locomotive took its breath, deeper this time. Steam washed across the platform like a curtain pulled halfway. For a second, he could not see the children, only the general outline of a world he had helped stack into neat, terrible rows. In training, they had told him a soldier who doubts is already defeated. Standing there, Hartman realized defeat sometimes looked like a uniform that fit perfectly. He folded the orders once, then again, and slid them into his pocket as if that could change the words. The whistle cracked the air. Guards raised their arms. The world leaned toward motion. Hartman stepped back from the platform edge, and somewhere behind his ribs, a small, stubborn voice finally spoke. Not this, it was quiet, but it didn't go away. If you think courage is only found on battlefields, stay with this story. The hardest fight he ever faced began when the train started moving, like what you're hearing. It helps more people find these stories of quiet defiance. Lublin District, occupied Poland, October 1943. The next morning, the world smelled of engine oil and frost again. Captain Friedrich Hartmann sat at his desk beneath a map marked with red pins and thin black lines that looked like veins. The radio crackled reports about new orders from Berlin. Every word was measured, bureaucratic, clean. Efficiency, they called it. That was the war's true language. He poured coffee from a tin pot and pretended not to see the manifest lying on his blotter. The names were gone now, replaced by numbers. 43 transfers completed, one small column of data in a sea of ink. He knew the process by heart. He'd been part of it since France, since Minsk, since the first time relocation stopped sounding strange. The machine always worked the same way. Orders came from above, paper passed down, men saluted, engines started. No one was guilty because everyone was obeying. His adjutant entered, dropping a folder onto the desk. Berlin wants confirmation of the new schedule, sir. Another group next week. Hartman nodded automatically. He signed, because that was what he did. His hand felt heavier than the pen. That night he walked the perimeter of the depot. The floodlights cast white circles on the snow. He heard a sentry humming a tune, soft and off-key, something like a lullaby. It made the darkness worse. He thought of the nun's words, "You could say no." He thought of the girl with the doll. He thought of what next week meant. The war had rules. A German officer's oath began with loyalty, "Ich schwöre bei Gott," I swear by God, and ended with obedience unto death. Every soldier knew it by heart. To disobey meant court-martial, prison, the wall, or worse, dishonor. But what was left to honor when the orders turned against children? Inside the depot, trains waited under tarps, silent as beasts sleeping in the dark. He touched the metal, cold even through his gloves. He'd once loved trains, their precision, their simplicity, a system that always worked if you followed the rules. Now he understood why the Reich loved them too. He remembered something his father once said in Vienna years ago, when he was still a boy watching trams go by. The line between order and cruelty is thinner than the rail it rides on. The next day, a new transport list arrived. 56 this time. He scanned the paper and stopped at one line. Orphanage, District 8. He recognized it. The same place. He folded the paper carefully, slid it into his coat, and walked out without signing. At headquarters, Colonel Weiss intercepted him. "Captain Hartmann, have you confirmed the manifest?" "Yes, sir," Hartmann lied. Weiss smiled thinly. "Good. We rely on officers like you. Discipline keeps the Reich strong." Hartmann saluted, said nothing. As he left, Weiss added, "The Führer has no patience for hesitation. You understand that, yes?" "Yes, sir," Hartmann replied, the words like stones in his mouth. That evening he sat on his bunk with the paper unfolded in front of him. Each line was a child. Each number was a breath that hadn't been taken yet. He imagined the train again, the steam, the small hand clutching a headless doll. And then another image, A school back in Vienna, his sister's laughter echoing in the hallways before the uniforms came. She had been the same age as those children when the war began. He pressed his palms to his eyes and saw nothing but white. A thought came, small and final, like a match striking in the dark. No more trains. He didn't know yet how he'd stop them, only that he would. If you think obedience is the same as honor, wait until you see what he does next, when following orders meant losing his soul. And if you're still here, make sure you follow for part 3, the moment he finally chooses defiance. Lublin District, late October, 1943. The rain had turned the roads to veins of mud. The air smelled of iron and wet hay, and the wind carried the far-off echo of trains that never stopped running. Captain Friedrich Hartmann stood beneath the orphanage arch again, clipboard under his arm, eyes fixed on the gate. He had come to inspect the facility, according to the official note he'd written himself. In truth, he'd come to look, and maybe to decide. The courtyard was quieter than before. Only the children's voices broke the monotony of boots and orders. A group of boys kicked a makeshift ball of rags. The nuns watched from the steps, faces pale and unreadable. When they saw Hartmann, the oldest among them crossed herself. He was supposed to check inventory, beds, blankets, medicine. That's what the Reich wanted to know, not who slept in the beds or who no longer did. But then he saw her again, the little girl with the headless doll. She was sitting on the steps, humming to herself. When she noticed him, she stood up quickly and saluted the way soldiers did in films. He almost smiled. Almost. Her hair was cleaner this time, tied with a red ribbon someone must have found for her. She lifted the doll and said in accented German, "She's better now. I found her head." The head was a ball of cloth stitched on crookedly. He nodded. "That's good. She looks brave." The girl grinned, missing a tooth. "She's not brave. She's scared. But I tell her stories so she doesn't cry." He couldn't answer. His throat had gone dry. Behind him, a young lieutenant called, "Captain, sir! The list?" Hartmann turned slowly. The manifest was blank. He had left it that way on purpose. "Later," he said. "I'm still counting." The lieutenant hesitated. "Berlin wants the transport confirmed by tomorrow." Hartmann's voice was calm. "Tomorrow, then." That night, he stayed in his quarters long after the lamps were out. Rain tapped the tin roof like a metronome for his thoughts. He took the manifest from his coat pocket. The empty lines glared up at him, waiting. He thought of the girl, the doll, the word relocation. He had spent 7 years obeying, every order, every signature, every salute. And what had it made him? A man who could walk past a crying child and call it procedure. He thought of his sister in Vienna again. Blonde curls, 8 years old, always asking him to tell stories. She had died in 1940 when an air raid hit their block. He'd told himself she was lucky to go before she had to see what the world became, but now he wasn't sure. The lamp flickered. His hand shook. He took his pen and began writing, slowly, deliberately. He wrote 12 names, the youngest on the orphanage list. Next to each one, he scribbled a note in his own handwriting, infected, typhus quarantine. Then another note to logistics, transport postponed. When he finished, he set the pen down. His pulse was hammering. The paper looked innocent enough, just ink and lies, but he knew what it meant. It meant disobedience. He poured himself a shot of vodka from the cupboard, the cheap kind they issued to keep men numb. He didn't drink it. He just held it, watching the light tremble in the glass. In that moment, a thought came, quiet but absolute. Orders end. Children live. At dawn, he arrived at the orphanage again. The lieutenant met him at the gate. "Sir, the train leaves in 1 hour. "Do we proceed?" Hartman handed him the new manifest stamped and signed. "These 12 stay behind," he said. "Quarantine order, possible infection." The lieutenant frowned. "Typhus." Hartman nodded. "Yes, inform medical. No contact until cleared." The lieutenant didn't question him. Typhus terrified everyone more than orders did. He saluted and ran to inform command. Hartman turned back to the nun and whispered, "Get them ready. Tonight." She stared at him, eyes wide, understanding instantly. "God bless you, Captain." He shook his head. "Not yet." When the trucks rolled out that morning, 12 names were missing from the list. No one noticed. Not yet. They were already halfway to a different truth, one that didn't fit in any report. He had crossed the line between duty and conscience. And once you cross it, there's no going back. If you think this is courage, wait until you see how the machine reacts when it discovers a missing line of ink. Outside Lublin, November 1st, 1943. The sky hung low, heavy with the promise of snow. The convoy yard was still asleep. Even the dogs hadn't started barking yet. Captain Friedrich Hartmann stood beside the back of a supply truck, clipboard in hand, pretending to check inventory while his pulse hammered beneath his collar. The paper on top said, "Medical quarantine, typhus supplies." The words were his shield, his camouflage, his lie. Under the tarpaulin, 12 children crouched between crates marked bandages, rations, and masks. Each had a blanket, a piece of bread, and a silence that seemed too old for their faces. A nun whispered a prayer behind him. "Father, protect them." Hartman didn't answer. He was not sure any god listened to men in his uniform. He glanced at his watch. 04:15. If they left now, they could reach the old convent outside Lublin before dawn, a place he'd found weeks earlier while delivering supplies. The sisters there took in sick children, no questions asked. He closed the tailgate, adjusted his gloves, and climbed into the cab. The engine coughed, then caught. One of the children whimpered at the sound. "Shh," he whispered through the wooden slats. "We'll be safe soon." For the first few kilometers, his hands didn't stop shaking. Every checkpoint, every curve in the road could be the end. The tires hissed over frozen mud, headlights swept across trees like searchlights in a dream. At the first guard post, 2 sentries stepped forward, rifles slung carelessly. "Papers," one said. Hartman passed them over. The man read the header, "Medical transport, typhus containment zone." He stepped back instantly, waving them through. "Move along. Don't bring that here." Hartman nodded. Understood. As the barrier lifted, he exhaled for the first time in 10 minutes. In the back, he heard a child whisper, "Are we there?" "Almost," he lied. He wasn't sure if it was for them or for himself. 2 hours later, the truck rolled to a stop near a crumbling stone wall. The convent bell tower loomed above, dark against the pale sky. Sister Helena, the woman he'd met before, was already waiting by the gate. She carried a lantern hidden beneath her cloak. "They'll be safe here," she said quietly. Hartman nodded, his throat too tight for words. He lifted the children out one by one. Each pair of eyes held something different. Fear, confusion, trust. The last to step down was the girl with the doll. She tugged his sleeve and asked, "Will you come too?" He forced a smile. "Not yet. I have to go back." She frowned. "Why?" "Because if I don't, they'll know." He wanted to say more, something about promises, about how bravery sometimes meant staying behind. But he didn't. He just pressed the broken doll's ribbon into her hand. "Keep this safe," he said, "for me." The nuns led the children inside. Hartman watched until the last door closed. Then he turned and walked back to his truck. For a moment, the world was completely still, just frost, the hum of the engine cooling, and his breath turning to fog. He looked down at his gloves. They were shaking again. He whispered to the cold air, 12 names, 12 souls. That's enough for tonight. When he climbed back into the cab, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror, the uniform, the insignia, the face of a man both condemned and redeemed. By the time he reached the depot, the sun was rising over the horizon like a blade. He parked the truck, locked the doors, and placed the forged manifest back on the colonel's desk. "Transport completed," he wrote in neat, steady letters. He didn't notice the young clerk watching him from the corner of the room, memorizing the way he avoided the question on the form. Were all transfers completed as ordered? That question would haunt him before the week was over. Because the machine he defied was built to find cracks, and it had just found one. Lublin, November 1943. The knock came at dawn. 3 times, hard, final. Captain Friedrich Hartmann was still buttoning his tunic when the door opened without permission. 2 men in grey stood there, caps wet with sleet, expressions like stone. "Captain Hartmann," one said, "you'll come with us." He didn't ask why. He already knew. The office smelled of paper and fear. Colonel Weiss sat behind his desk, immaculate as ever. On the blotter lay the forged manifest, creased, handled, now evidence. Weiss didn't look up right away. He let the silence weigh first. Finally, 12 missing. I'll ask once, Captain. Where are they? Hartmann stared at the floorboards, at the cracks filled with dust. Quarantine, he said softly. Weiss slammed his hand on the desk. Do not insult me with lies. The other officers shifted. No one met Hartmann's eyes. Weiss stood, voice low but sharp. You've been a good soldier. You served with discipline. Why throw that away for a handful of children? Hartmann answered without thinking, the words rising from somewhere deeper than fear. Because someone had to. Weiss froze. For a moment the mask slipped, his voice almost human. You understand what happens now? Hartmann nodded. Yes. They led him to a holding room. Bare walls, a single chair, the ticking of a clock. No shouting, no threats. Just the slow ritual of bureaucracy devouring another name. Hours passed. Papers were signed elsewhere, verdicts written before trials. Through the small window he saw the rail yard again, the same line of cars waiting in the snow. The whistle blew, faint but clear. He whispered to himself, not this time. When they finally returned, the verdict was already typed. For acts of treason, insubordination, and collaboration with the enemy, death by firing squad. He read the words as though they belonged to someone else. One officer asked if he wanted to write a final statement. He nodded. They gave him a scrap of paper and a pencil. He wrote slowly, the graphite faint on the cheap pulp. To whomever finds this, I was not brave. I was only unwilling to remain silent. The children are innocent. Let them live. That is all I ask. He folded it once, twice, and slid it into his pocket. They didn't search him again. At dawn the next day, they marched him behind the depot, past the trucks he used to command. The sky was the color of lead. His boots left clear prints in the frost. The officer in charge read the sentence aloud, voice echoing against the brick walls. Hartmann looked up, meeting no one's eyes. He thought of the convent. He pictured the girl with the doll, the ribbon bright against grey cloth. He hoped she was warm. A soldier asked if he wanted a blindfold. He shook his head. No, I want to see. The officer raised his hand. The rifles clicked. Somewhere far away, church bells began to ring. The report filed that morning read simply, Captain Friedrich Hartmann, executed for refusal to carry out orders. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was written in the convent's guest ledger, where Sister Helena later inscribed 12 names under a single note. Arrived safely, November 1st, 1943, escorted by a German officer. If you followed this far, you already know. Some battles are fought without weapons. The next part closes this story when the children he saved return to the place he died and the world finally learns his name. Lublin, 1961. Snow again, but softer now, gentler than it had been in that terrible winter. The old convent still stood at the edge of the forest, its walls pale and scarred, the bell tower leaning slightly with age. Children's laughter drifted from somewhere inside. Life had come back. A woman in her 20s approached the gate slowly, a bundle wrapped in paper under her arm. She paused, taking in the courtyard, the crooked fence, the small wooden cross beside the road. Her name was Hannah Lewin, though that hadn't always been her name. Once she'd been just a number on a manifest, one of 12. The nun who greeted her, older now, stooped but sharp, smiled the moment she recognized her. "Hannah," she said softly, "I wondered when you'd come." They embraced without speaking. Some memories didn't need words. "I brought this," Hannah said, unwrapping the bundle. Inside was a small doll, its head sewn back on with uneven stitches, the same one she'd carried out of the orphanage 18 years before. "He gave me this," she whispered. "He said to keep it safe." The nun nodded. "You kept his promise then?" Hannah hesitated. "Do you know what happened to him?" The nun sighed. "Yes. They found him 2 days later, shot at the depot. They buried him outside the fence with no marker, just snow." Hannah looked down at the doll, her fingers tracing the red ribbon now faded to pink. She said quietly, "I'd like to find that place." That afternoon they walked together to the edge of the old rail yard. The tracks were half buried, rusted, the station a shell. But the ground still held the memory of boots, engines and fear. The nun stopped near a bare patch of earth where the snow melted faster than elsewhere. "This is where they say it happened," she murmured. Hannah knelt and placed the doll there. She brushed the snow aside and set down a small wooden plaque she'd carved herself. Captain Friedrich Hartmann, 1902-1943. He defied orders to save 12 children. We are the 12. The wind rose, lifting her hair and scattering a few flakes across the wood. She stayed there a long time until the sound of the bells from the convent reached her ears. That night, she wrote a letter to a war memorial commission in Vienna. It ended with these words: "He was not a hero to himself. He said he only wanted to help, but to us, he was proof that mercy can survive in any uniform." Years later, his name would appear on a bronze wall among others who had chosen conscience over command. Historians would argue whether his story was myth or memory. But for the 12 he saved, there was no question. Their children lived. Their children's children played in the snow where trains once rolled. Sometimes at dusk, when the bells rang and the sky turned iron grey, locals swore they could hear the hum of an engine and the faint echo of a man's voice saying, "You'll ride together." He disobeyed a tyrant. He saved 12 souls. And though his name was nearly erased, his choice remained, the quiet rebellion that said humanity matters more than orders. If you've been with this story from the first page, remember this: courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to be human when obedience is easier. Would you have followed orders or followed your heart? Tell me below what you believe defines true courage.